Thank you for joining us today for our Forte Conquer Your Career nonprofit. My name is Ariane Rastock, and I am the Director of MBA and Professional Programs at Forte. I am delighted to be joined by three experts, MBA women with post-business school careers at nonprofit organizations. I'm Elantria Harris, Lauren Blitzer, and Rebecca Bronfield. Welcome, and thank you all for joining the panel today. I'd like to start the conversation by briefly getting to know each of the three of you. And so I think I'd like to start off with Lauren. I see that while you were at the McCombs School of Business, you were president of the Net Impact and had a specific interest in nonprofit studies and social enterprise. So why don't you get us started and just tell us a little bit more about your path and where you're at now.
Sure. Hi. My name is Lauren Blitzer, and I went to Texas McCombs. I was in the graduating class of 2011, and I knew going into business school that I was really interested in pursuing a program that would lead to a nonprofit career. So I looked at a number of different schools, and my husband got his MBA at the same time, so we had to find a program that worked for both of our different interests. But I went to McCombs. I led the Net Impact chapter there. I started a Board Fellows program while I was there, which is still in existence today. And then I did my job search exclusively in the nonprofit sector. I joined Texas Women's Foundation, formerly Dallas Women's Foundation, in 2011 when I graduated from McCombs, and have been here ever since. So we're a foundation. We fund nonprofits, and so I am constantly looking for the most efficient and effective investments of my donors' dollars into the nonprofit community here in Texas.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Lauren. So Rebecca, I believe you're on, and right now you're on mute, so if you can click on that little red microphone next to your name, you'll come off mute. But Rebecca, you're a graduate of the Yale School of Management, and you were also actually a leader of the Net Impact group at your school as well. You're really the most recent graduate of our group, graduating 3 years ago. So can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Great to be here today. Again, my name is Rebecca Bronfield, and yes, I started my career in the nonprofit sector before my MBA, did program and strategy work, and then while at Yale SOM was a leader of the Net Impact chapter, as well as a Forte Fellow, so pleased to be here. And yeah, my career has always been focused on social impact. I knew going into business school that that was something that I wanted to do coming out of it, and was trying to think about the right place to do that kind of work. As part of my MBA experience, was thinking a lot about what it would look like to do strategy in the social sector, and so ended up after my MBA at Bridgespan, which is a social impact advisor. So we work with both nonprofits and philanthropists to tackle big strategic questions that organizations are facing. And so ended up in nonprofit consulting, which is a very common interest in the MBA world, but sort of backed into it, so we'll be happy to speak to that if helpful, and now do a range of work leading teams of consultants with small to large organizations in the nonprofit sector, particularly in early childhood, as well as advising high net worth individuals and foundations on how to make really thoughtful investments that will lead to social impact in the field.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. I have a set of questions that I'm going to be asking each of our panelists, but we would love to have audience questions as well, and we'll address those towards the end of our discussion. But at any time, you can type them in the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and get started with Rebecca. Tell us a little bit more about your current position, and what does a typical day look like for you in your role?
Sure. So at Bridgespan, we work in teams to support different nonprofit or philanthropic clients. And so I am currently what we call a case team leader, which essentially means either the anchor consultant on a consulting project, or actually the junior manager leading the work of the team. And so what that means kind of day to day, I'm responsible for pieces of the analysis, as well as really thinking about what the answer is for the client. So if they're asking a hard question, what do we think a potential path forward could look like, and how are we pulling together all of the analysis to support a recommendation and advisory for the client? And so day to day, I'm usually in a mix of client calls. We spend a lot of the time on the phone. We actually don't travel as much here to keep costs low for our social sector clients. So a lot of time on the phone doing interviews, learning more about the content of their work, or spending time with clients wrestling with some of these really hard questions that they're asking about. Another chunk of my time is working with the team. So we have regular case team meetings. We do a lot of brainstorming and thinking about the work together in teams or in pairs. And then spending other parts of the day kind of going back to my desk and doing some of the thinking. So doing research, doing some analysis, reviewing the work that my team members have been doing, and really pulling up to think about, again, that recommendation for the client. I also do travel a fair amount, although not as much as a typical management consultant. So earlier this week, I spent a few days in Seattle meeting with a number of clients who are doing part of our executive coaching program there. And then in between, answering emails, doing some thinking about my other projects. We typically work on 2 different projects, 2 client-facing projects at a time here at Bridgespan. So the days are pretty varied, but it's been a really fun role coming right out of business school. We start as consultants here, so sort of learning the trade. I was new to consulting, and now getting to move into that team leadership role, which has been really fun and a great way to apply my MBA skill set.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate that. Lauren, I'm going to ask just this next question to you. Can you talk a little bit about what someone can do in their MBA program to really help prepare them for a career in a nonprofit organization? What types of courses and activities could they be engaging in?
Absolutely. So I have what some may consider a unique take on this. So on the one hand, I went to get an MBA because I feel that in many ways nonprofits are like businesses and can benefit from a business approach to the world. That said, I also think that there are a lot of things that make nonprofits unique. And so assuming that someone who has been successful in the corporate world can just waltz on over to a nonprofit and take over as a leader there can often be incorrect. There's a mix of the two. And so I think that being in an MBA program is a great foundation, but using that as an opportunity to also get specific nonprofit sector experience can be very beneficial. So if your MBA program has a net impact chapter, and if they have specifically a board fellows program, I think those are both great opportunities to learn more about the ways that nonprofits operate that may be a little unique, and to get firsthand experience in the nonprofit sector. I also think that while you have your 2 years or however long your program may be, to use the opportunity in your community to find nonprofits that you can volunteer with to get that experience. So even if you're not taking on a paid job in addition to your MBA, which would be a lot of work, volunteering, getting used to the sector, getting experience in the sector is really beneficial, and is something that as I'm hiring, I would look for as a plus, as a demonstration of someone's interest in the sector. I'm trying to think of there was one other thing that I had in my mind, and I should have jotted it down. But I would say that even if your school doesn't have a formal program, you certainly are, your school is located in a community that has lots of nonprofits. And so taking the opportunity to at least start volunteering would be one way without a formal program to do that. Oh, I remember what it was. Texas McCombs, we do not have a specific nonprofit management track within the business school. But being at the larger UT, in the larger UT system, I had the benefit of taking a nonprofit portfolio program, which is a certificate that you can earn alongside your degree and take classes in any of the other graduate schools at the university. So my marketing department did not have a marketing for nonprofits class, but the advertising school did at the master's level. And so not every school program has this, but I was able to look across my university outside of the specific MBA program and select courses that were that great blend of business and of nonprofit, and to take courses in other schools that still counted towards my degree. So the accounting program has accounting for nonprofits. The policy school has some program classes, things like that may be available at other schools as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lauren. And Rebecca, I'm just going to jump over to you. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to what Lauren has said about, things you can do while you're in your MBA program to prepare you for a career in nonprofit?
Yeah, I think I'd echo everything that you said, Lauren. I certainly took advantage of a mix of coursework, those extracurricular activities, net impact, and other clubs to get some of that practice, and then also thinking about your internship opportunity as a way to explore different elements of the social sector. So if there's a particular content interest that you have, getting to know that over the summer, or thinking about the skills that you want to develop that would be helpful to bring back into the social sector afterwards. So happy to talk more about internships as well, but I think that's a really special opportunity in an MBA program to explore some new ideas.
Okay, great. Thank you. Actually, I'd like to jump over to our other panelist who just was able to join us. Alantria, you're a graduate of the Ross School of Business at Michigan. It looks like you graduated with your MBA, and you were a little bit more maybe perhaps on a marketing path, but can you tell us a little bit more about you, really kind of some of the choices you've made along the way, really leading to your work at Girl Scouts? And, tell us a little bit more about your typical day and what you do in your role.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. I am so excited to share with you all a little bit about me. So I graduated from the Ross School of Business. I focused and concentrated in marketing. So my path into nonprofit was a little bit later. It wasn't immediately after business school. So I started out in marketing roles at Procter & Gamble, and at UPS, and then I entered into the Broad residency in education, and so that was my first entry into nonprofit. I knew that I wanted to do something that was more impactful, meaningful, and I started with education because the Broad residency is just a phenomenal program for you to learn about education, get your feet wet working in the school district. And so I did the residency for about 2 years. And then after I was done with the residency, I moved over into Girl Scouts of Greater Atlanta. And my role now is product program, senior director, and retail. Very long title. Basically means that I am responsible for the Girl Scout Cookie Program, which, as many of you all know, is happening at this exact moment. So lots of things happening around Girl Scout Cookie Program, but we're having a good program for our girls. We also have another fall product program, and then we have our retail stores where we have all of our Girl Scout merchandise. My role is the perfect combination of everything that I have done before in my career. So I do a little project management, I do some innovation, I'm in the day-to-day executional, I'm strategic, I use marketing, I use operations, everything that you learn in an MBA program, I do now. Day-to-day, it just depends on the day. So today I am working on cookie booths. We've had some cookie booth little fires that I've been putting out, definitely, but, also just working on how can we drive other girls and volunteers to get excited about our programs, how can we make sure that they're learning everything, what are some cool marketing things that we can do for the consumers to know about the Girl Scout Cookie Program. So that is what I typically do all the time. I love it. It is definitely in my passion. I would say having an MBA has allowed me the flexibility to be able to change my career from over into marketing, into education, and now into nonprofit. I didn't focus specifically on nonprofit when I was in my MBA. As I mentioned, I did marketing. I did do a nonprofit board fellowship at Michigan, which was really good way for me to learn about being on the board and learn really the operations around nonprofit. And I took a couple different classes there as well. But happy to answer any other questions regarding my path and what it is that I do now.
Great. Thanks so much, Alantria. So I'm going to jump back into some of these questions here. Lauren, Can you tell us a little bit about, what are the possible career tracks that you could be going into, or what other career tracks did you consider while you were in your MBA program?
Sure. So I actually did my internship with the FBI. So I knew that I wanted to do mission-driven work, and I wasn't entirely sure how broadly I could define that and still be happy. So I used my MBA internship as an opportunity to try government work. The FBI is certainly mission-driven. Culturally, it turned out not to be a great fit for me. But it was really interesting work, and it was a great 10 weeks, and then it helped me narrow that down. So I think it was, Rebecca had mentioned earlier, using your internship as a way to try things out, and that certainly held true for me. I think the neat thing about the nonprofit sector is that you can think about being, doing this work from a functional standpoint or from a cause-minded standpoint, and then any combination therein. So some people may be drawn to the nonprofit sector because they're really passionate about the environment and they want to do environmentally focused work and are function agnostic. Other people, are finance majors in their MBA program and know they want to do finance work, want to do that with a social impact lens, but the specific cause is wide open. So I think that thinking through those two competing components, or complementary components actually, and figuring out where in that grid you fit. Can you work on any cause but in a specific function, like marketing or finance, because we still need accountants in the nonprofit sector, right? All of these organizations still need that important skill set. Or is the reason that you're drawn to the sector because you're drawn to a very specific type of cause, like women's issues, and then maybe you could join me at the Texas Women's Foundation in a number of different types of the many different roles that we have here. So I really believe that if there is a job in the private sector, it exists in the nonprofit sector in some way. In that regard, I think that the decisions are endless.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lauren. I know, Elantra, you really kind of echoed that in your introduction, talking about you can do a little bit of everything in your current role. So, Elantra, coming back to you for a question, what does job progression look like for someone in nonprofits?
Absolutely. So I would say, in terms of a nonprofit, there are a lot of opportunities to do many different things. Nonprofits change, all the time, because the world that we operate in is so fluid, and so there is an ability for sometimes you may start out in a particular role, and then the organization has a new mission or a new focus that they want, and so things can change in terms of the focus of the work, and so then your work can shift. It could lead to a promotion. It could lead to expanded responsibilities that would come in that. So the job progression is definitely based on the organization continuously moving on and growing and maturing and furthering its mission more and more. And we're seeing, as nonprofits are growing and having more impact overall, that the mission is expanding. And so definitely bringing in individuals from the private sector or just even MBAs who have the business skill sets that are helpful to help nonprofits move into their next area of fulfilling their mission will be helpful as well. And, typically career progression, I would say overall for some nonprofit, it depends on your organization. It may, if you stay within a certain organization, it may be a little flat because, there's really the CEO, a COO, and then there's the directors, and then there's the management staff. But then there's definitely an opportunity to move up into those different types of roles as, the positions become available and as the organization continues to further in its mission.
Okay, great. Thank you. Rebecca, a question for you. If someone wants to continue to, just learn more about nonprofit work, who are the influencers, organizations to watch, publications to read, what recommendations would you make to them?
Sure. So I'll make some recommendations based on when I was an MBA and then a little bit self-serving. So one is I think the Bridgespan Group is actually a really great resource. A big part of our work in addition to consulting is doing research and publishing. We actually have a deal with our clients that we essentially share everything we learn. So Bridgespan's website is really useful. We have a ton of resources for organizations, but also some newsletters. So if you're interested, you can actually sign up for different content areas and just get a pulse of what's going on in the sector based on what we're writing about. The other publication that is sort of well known in the sector is the Stanford Social Innovation Review. You can find it online. There's also a print version, but really awesome articles, thought-provoking questions, almost good case studies if you're ever prepping for an interview about the kinds of things that the sector is grappling with. Bridgespan publishes there, but also there are contributors from all kinds of leading organizations, both in the sort of strategy sector, but also just leaders of nonprofits and foundations as well. And then another, I think, interesting place, and Lauren, maybe you have an opinion on this, but I think it's interesting to watch what kind of leading funders are doing in this space. They often have a really good pulse on the field, particularly in certain content areas, and a number of funders are really doing pretty cutting-edge work domestically and abroad. So folks like the Gates Foundation, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the Ballmer Group, Rockefeller. I don't know if any of those names are resonating with folks, but a lot of them are just doing really fascinating work and kind of pushing the edge of the social sector. So both following what they're doing and then looking at some of the organizations that they're funding is a great way just to get to know the space and honestly to think about doing some networking as you're thinking about jobs. I know that was a strategy I had of who are some really interesting funders, who's in their portfolio, and maybe that's where I would actually look to find a job coming out of business school.
Okay, great. That's a great list of resources for our listeners today. So, Lancia, a question back to you. If someone doesn't have that background or experience in nonprofit, you know, how can they leverage their MBA to break in?
So the biggest thing is a lot of nonprofits are growing, and in order for them to continue to further their mission and move to do new things, business-minded individuals are really critical to the nonprofit. You definitely have the heart and the head thing here in nonprofit where your heart is for the mission, but then, you know, your head is around more of the business focus. And so being able to have the blend of both is really important, and being able to show a few things, you know, moving in from your MBA. So, you know, leadership. Can you take on projects and work with delivering different initiatives into an organization? Problem solving. There is always a problem every single day in nonprofit, particularly because the mission is so large, the heart is there to serve and to make, you know, everything work well for the those who we serve. And so being able to figure out how to address those problems and coming up with great strategies around that. Collaboration and team building. A lot of things are done with other individuals, other departments, and so those are important. And I would say, you know, just leveraging or knowing that like I said before, the flexibility of the MBA is definitely important. So showcasing, I have an MBA, I've learned all these different things, is more on the soft skills than it is the hard skills in some instances. But being able to indicate, you know, those three things that I mentioned, the leadership, the problem solving, and the collaboration and team building are definitely the things to focus on, you know, as you try to enter into nonprofit.
Lauren, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
That was really comprehensive. I think she really, I thought that was a great answer, so I don't at this time.
Okay, all right, great. So I wanted to start the conversation off with us, of course, answering some questions to get our audience thinking, but now I do want to turn it over to our listeners for their questions so we can have a richer conversation. As I mentioned before, in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little Q&A box you can open up and ask some questions, but we have a number of questions coming in already, so I will start with this first one. And I think I'm going to direct this back to Rebecca because you mentioned this towards the very beginning, wanting to talk a little bit about this, but talk a little bit more about your internship experience. You know, did you utilize the school's career management center, or was your search mainly off campus and through outside networks? So talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, great question, and I think this is a big one for folks, especially if you're a first-year MBA student. So I did a little bit of both. I certainly leveraged, Yale SOM actually has, usually there's one person in the career development office who's kind of tagged to the social sector, but Net Impact was a particularly important resource. We got a lot of sort of the inbound interest for internships and just sort of the knowledge of the group based on people's previous work experience. So I leveraged a combination of postings that were coming in from the career development office, but as also that network. And I kind of had two different approaches. I ended up doing a fellowship program, and there are a number of fellowships in the social impact space, which I find to be really helpful if you're interested in learning more about either a content area and using that to expand your network, depending on what resources you have at your school. So I participated in something called the New Sector Alliance internship. And they actually, I think, are currently paused on an MBA experience, but it's similar to a number, including Education Pioneers, which I also looked into for education work. There's something called Inspiring Capital that I believe is based in New York. There's one for the environment that the name is I'm blanking on right now, and there's also a common one with the National Park Service. And what's cool about doing a fellowship is you get to apply your MBA skill set to a particular content area and get additional coaching. So part of my summer was actually spending time, I'm based in San Francisco, getting to know folks in San Francisco, learning about the nonprofit scene here, connecting with other fellows who are part of my summer internship experience, and actually getting to coach some undergraduates who were part of my program as well. So doing a fellowship, there's sort of pros and cons there. The pro is that you get that sort of additional network and support and flexibility in terms of learning, but you actually make a trade-off. Usually there's an earlier application deadline, and you usually have to sign on before you know where you'll be placed. So for fellowship programs, you usually say, yes, I want to participate, and then in the spring you find out through sort of an interview process which organization you're going to work with that summer. So I found out, I think about a week before I started my summer internship, that I would be working with a college access organization, which ended up being great. I did a cool culture project with them, but there was a little bit of that, I don't know what I'm going to be doing this summer until pretty close to it. The other track that a number of my peers took is sort of the traditional networking route, which I would say my advice to MBAs is that this is a long game. It's actually a 2-year process, particularly for the social sector, because most summer internships won't be able to give you a full-time offer at the end of August, as many for-profit jobs will. So that's good and bad. It gives you that flexibility, like Lauren said, to try something out, and maybe you don't like it, and there is that pressure at the end of it to say yes or no. But it also just means that doing some of that networking is going to be more on your own. So again, identifying organizations that you're interested in, starting to talk to people and seeing, as Elantria has been talking about, like, what do they need help with? Like, what are the kinds of questions they're grappling with? Are they moving into a new area? Could they use a smart MBA student to support that and use that as kind of a learning opportunity to then figure out in your second year really what you want to do long term? So that was, I ended up doing the fellowship route, but that was my sort of other track that I was hoping would then help me set up for the full-time recruiting in my second year.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question since we have a lot of them. I'm going to actually ask this to all of you, and you can just say yes or no, and we can kind of elaborate if needed. Did any of you get exposure to work with any nonprofit organization internationally while pursuing an MBA, or perhaps even maybe one of your fellow students had exposure to that? So international nonprofit.
Yeah,
I don't have any experience.
No,
I've mostly done domestic work as well, but I do know a number of folks at Yale SOM have an international interest. It's become an increasingly big part of the school. One way to do that is we had a course, and I bet other schools have something like this, or maybe something you could think about with Net Impact, of doing basically a semester-long consulting project with a social enterprise in a developing country. So this was a really popular class, and folks would work in Brazil, in India, and I think in sub-Saharan Africa, a number of different countries. So that was a really cool structured way, especially guided by a professor, to get to know a developing country, to do some real work, as I think Lauren was recommending, like see what it actually looks like to do that, and to travel within as a student. Often there's funding available to support those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, I think the MBA skill set is particularly relevant in a global world, and probably a lot of the coursework you're taking has that global element too. The U.S. nonprofit sector is certainly the most developed. It's also developing, and the U.K. is pretty advanced. And India actually as well. We're doing some work there. We have a Mumbai office now. So if you're thinking about a sector, and then there's tons and tons of smaller nonprofits, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, that are often looking for support, or even, you know, just pro bono advising because they have fewer resources over there to leverage.
Okay. This
is Lauren. I've not personally worked with an international nonprofit. I will just two quick things. Our international business class that does a 2-week trip over spring break, some of the programs do include work with a nonprofit in that country. The trip that I went on, I went to Southeast Asia. We did not have a nonprofit component to ours, but I know that some of the other countries' trips did. So that was a traditional business management class, but that particular professor included local nonprofits in that course. At Texas also, we have a Masters of Public Administration school, and they often have classes and their job fair also often includes a lot of organizations like Chemonics or USAID that are doing work in other countries, and so they're a resource often looking for business skills, but in a different school.
Yeah, that was a great addition to make. Yeah.
And I do want to add now, I know I didn't have any personal experience working with a international nonprofit, but I can share at Michigan, we have what are called consulting projects, and so there were several others from my class who went and worked with nonprofit organizations in India and South Africa on any of their projects for about 4 weeks on different things. So there was an opportunity to do that at Michigan.
Okay, great. And I think the key takeaway really from what you've all said is, you know, really we have both current students and we have women that are looking at getting their MBA program, but an MBA. But, you know, if you're in the stage of really looking at schools, this is an important question to ask or talk to students about is, you know, what other additional experiences through their classes might they have with nonprofit organizations. So, yeah, thank you for all of your insights on that. So this is the next question. I think maybe I'll start with Lauren on this, but did you consider social impact jobs in the private sector? If so, you know, what drew you to nonprofit over private?
Sure. So a couple of things, and I think my internship is an example of this. Culture is really important to me, and that's part of why I use my internship as an opportunity to explore government work. And I just found that the culture fit was not right for what I was looking for. And so I did look a little bit at the for-profit sector. I have done work in that sector before coming to business school, but had struggled to find the right cultural fit for me. I also, a lot of the larger organizations that have corporate social responsibility programs, it was like, well, yeah, come in through marketing and work for 15 years, and then if there's an opening, you can transfer over. to CSR. At least when I was doing my search, that was kind of the path. They really were not at the time looking to hire direct from an MBA program into corporate impact or corporate social responsibility. And I just knew myself, and I knew that I had no interest in spending a decade in marketing, partly just because that's not my functional skill set, in the hopes that one day I might be able to transfer over. So having done some looking, I kind of got the sense that I wanted to be at a nonprofit, although I knew I wanted a business-minded, strategic thinking nonprofit. So when I moved back to Dallas, I spent a long time doing informational interviews to understand the culture and the approach to programming at each organization. And I took a long time to really find the right fit, and I've been here for almost 8 years. So it paid off for me in the end, but recognizing that it wasn't just about mission, it wasn't just about function, but that it was also about culture for me personally was a really important part of my process.
Okay. Does anybody else want to add anything to that one? Okay, so going on to my next question. How would you advise looking for nonprofit work if you have a specific position in mind, but are open to what mission you're helping with?
I'm happy to field that. It's a really good question. I realized that I was a bit of a generalist in terms of my interests across the sector, and so if you're interested in strategy, I think consulting is actually a really interesting way to do that. It's a great way to try out working with lots of different kinds of organizations while developing a really rigorous analytical, strategic mindset and the skills that go along with it. So that's how I ended up in that space. I was looking for strategy roles within organizations, which are honestly often hard to find. Organizations have to be pretty large to have a formal strategy role or department within them. And so consulting is kind of a nice way to try out a lot of different types of content. The other is just really leveraging, job boards, postings. There are a number of good resources like Idealist and I think Bridgespan also has some nonprofit postings, but just you can filter searches and starting to look for certain roles across organizations. I think in some ways that can be helpful, and even in your interview, I think organizations tend to ask about that mission fit, and so if you have any narrowing, so for example, I learned about myself that while I'm a generalist, I have less passion for environmental causes because I really care about people, although, especially being out here, I increasingly see the impact on people of our environment. And also that I prefer working with children and families versus older generations because I've done work across both. So even narrowing a little bit can be helpful there, but there are sort of certain ways to toggle in terms of that functional versus content search.
Yes, and this is Lauren. I would just add, I would not ever, I personally would not ever say that you don't care about the mission, or meaning like you're just open to anything. So I would find some way like to narrow it a little bit. You don't have to say that, the dolphins are the only thing that you're passionate about in your life and you would only ever write, but you can talk a little more broadly about how this could be a good alignment. I think presenting yourself as mission agnostic is a risky move.
Okay, we have a few questions, several questions related to pay and one that gets into, financing your degree because, this sector is going to pay less than, or potentially less than the private sector. So a specific question in terms of salary expectations, is it customary for those going into nonprofit to expect to make less than their classmates?
Sure, I can speak to this. I think, unfortunately, the answer is yes, which is something that I personally, it's a passion of mine to figure out how do we better pay the people who are trying to address the hardest problems facing our world and deserve to be paid and compensated in that way. So I think the answer is yes. The MBA will generally be a really helpful tool for getting an increased salary bump compared to if you were to sort of just stay the course at a nonprofit. So good investment, and of course is very expensive, and there's an opportunity cost there. So I would say a couple things that you may, if you're either in an MBA program or starting to look for one, that you can leverage are many schools will have loan forgiveness programs. I know even Yale's, unfortunately, has actually been shrinking a little bit in terms of the amount, which is disappointing, but there are programs that if you graduate and work in the social sector, even within, let's say, 10 years of graduating, you can have some loan forgiveness. So that is really helpful. Also thinking about scholarships to be on the lookout for. Often applying earlier rounds in MBAs will open up some scholarship opportunities. I know I benefited from that, which was really helpful for me just in financing on the front end. And then, doing your best, leveraging your negotiation skills that hopefully you'll learn in business school, keeping in mind that, again, mission-driven organizations often have expectations from funders that they don't have a ton of overhead and that costs are low. And so definitely negotiate and see what the opportunities are. And unfortunately, our sector just doesn't have the degrees of freedom to pay what this work deserves. So I think there's that reality. There are some great resources to leverage, and hopefully we can also shift that across the sector.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this next question is, I'm not sure if anybody can describe this, but how is an MBA different than an MPA if you know you want to do nonprofit work?
Oh, I would love to speak to that. Quickly, sorry, because I looked at both degrees. I actually applied.
Okay,
when I applied to both MPA and MBA programs. And for me, I think it came down to two main things in my personal decision. So one was I felt, and in talking with other people, I felt that I knew I wanted to go into nonprofit, but I really couldn't predict what my life was going to be like in 10, 15, 20 years. And maybe at some point something would change and I would need to go back into the corporate world for whatever reason. I felt like an MBA was not going to close doors in the nonprofit sector, and it would certainly keep them open in the for-profit sector. I had the perception that in talking to other people seemed to have the same perception, that an MPA would also be well received in the nonprofit world, but would not be as well respected in the for-profit world. And I didn't want to accidentally close any doors that I might need later in life. So that was one of the really big points for me. The second was that I actually visited a number of MPA programs and MBA programs, and I had already been in the workforce for a couple of years at this point, and I found that in the particular MPA schools that I applied to and that I interviewed at and visited, almost everyone was coming straight out of undergrad with no work experience. And so the discussions in the class and the experiences that were offered were just very, very different than those that were offered at MBA programs where students had practical work experience and now were returning to school to get their second degree. And so I found that I was a better fit at MBA programs. But those were two things that really stood out for me during that process when I was actually considering both types of things. I also found that most MPA graduates at the time and at the programs that I looked at tended to go into government work and not traditional nonprofit social service work. And most of the programs that I interviewed at even said, so you want to go work in government or you want to go work in policy or and I was like, no, I don't. I want to be at a social service organization. And so I personally found through the process that I was not the best fit for an MPA.
Great, thank you. So this person is asking, for those already in nonprofits and are looking to apply to MBA programs, how do you suggest we showcase our work in our application?
It's a great question. I can take that because I was coming from a fairly small nonprofit, national, but small in size and recognition. So a couple thoughts here. One is try to concretize your work as much as possible. When we talk about resumes, there's always a focus on quantifying, and especially in the social sector, that can often be more challenging. You don't always have sales targets that you've met, or the outcomes of the students that you're working with may not show up for some time. And so trying to be as concrete as possible, quantifying while you can, and pulling out the skills that you've been developing. I would also say to try to contextualize your work. So explain a little bit about the work you do, the role you have. I know I had a position, for example, that was called the Volunteer and Alumni Development Associate. And so someone once asked me if I was paid for my work because it had the word volunteer in it, which was frustrating for a couple of reasons. But I think just clarifying what it is that you do. I often, on my resume, because I worked for a number of smaller organizations, actually put a line underneath the title that was a one-line description of what the organization did. Just so, again, if a reader is reviewing your information and they don't know the work, either the space or the organization, they have a little bit more context to help them understand the work and the experience that you're presenting. And then finally, I think helping to connect the dots about why the MBA and how you would leverage the skills that you have from the social sector as part of that, and what you'll do on campus and beyond, and making sure that that's really clear for them so they understand your trajectory, because again, you may be a slightly less traditional candidate in those senses.
Okay. Great. Anybody else want to add anything? I'll move on to the next one. So does anyone have, so somebody asked, what are the resources available to someone interested in social entrepreneurship?
I can speak to this quickly. I'm really excited to hear this question. I think it's a really hot topic now, social entrepreneurship. A lot of entrepreneurship programs are even generally slanting towards social impact, which is really exciting to me. So this is a great question, especially if you're looking at MBA programs, seeing what's available both as part of the MBA experience as well as on campus. I know at Yale, there was increasingly interest at the business school, but actually on campus more broadly, there were a bunch of different kind of incubators and funds you could apply for. And so just keeping an eye out for that if that's something of interest. An MBA experience, it used to not be this way, but it's actually a great time now and more supported to be trying out some new ideas and learning those entrepreneurial skill sets. And then the other is there are a number of fellowships. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I know a number of my classmates actually applied for external funding or grants to work on different things. I know Net Impact sometimes has sort of a request for submissions of ideas that you can enter. I was part of a food competition, another hot topic. And so just keeping an eye out for that as you think about summer internship experiences or co-curricular opportunities while you're in school.
Great, thank you. Somebody is asking, just real quickly, we'll go down the line, what were each of your respected majors or interests during business school? So, Launch, I'll start with you. Your major or interest.
In business school, I concentrated on marketing and human resources.
Okay. Lauren?
At UT at the time, the program was social enterprise, actually. And so that's where I fit, but I focused mostly on the nonprofit portfolio program that was cross graduate school at UT.
Okay, and Rebecca?
So I have a general MBA at Yale. We don't have any kind of tracks, but my sort of unofficial focus was on nonprofit management, which essentially meant that as many electives as I had, I was trying to focus all of them within the social sector.
Okay. So I'm going to ask each of you to address this one as well, but what do you think is a distinguishing factor or element that you can gain from an MBA program that perhaps you might not otherwise be able to learn from just a corporate job or a regular job? You know, what was the advantage you think you got from your MBA?
I can start. I think a couple things, particularly knowing that I was interested in the social sector. One is just this general strong skill set in leadership, strategic thinking, and management. You may have roles that train you in certain ways, but having an opportunity to get that broad skill set and be learning alongside others and benefiting from other people's experiences, I think is just really powerful and enables you, as I think all of us have spoken to do just a number of things with your career. And then I do think that the perspective taking, so the idea of getting to learn from lots of different industries. At Yale, we have a big focus on leadership for society and business, so thinking public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and gaining all of that to inform the kind of skills that you can bring back to whatever your next job is just really, I think, powerful and helps advance your learning and growth.
Okay.
And I just think that the MBA, forces you to take a break, to try a lot of different things. In my previous job, I didn't do any accounting. I had to take accounting classes, and then what I got to choose to do was whenever there was a special project or an elective class or something, to take that business knowledge and apply it to the nonprofit sector. So we didn't have a nonprofit management concentration, but I used every opportunity with electives and special projects in all of those other classes where I was learning the broad base of foundational skills to apply them to the sector. I got a reputation really quickly in my program as the girl who was always going to pick the nonprofit example whenever there was a space. But it was a great way to apply a variety of different disciplines to the sector.
Okay, great.
And I would say for me, I'm an engineer by my background from undergraduate, and so getting the MBA was a way for me to have more of a business mindset. Definitely, I would say the MBA helped me more so on the soft side than it did on the hard side. And so being able to learn more about leadership, how to address organizational challenges, having a very big picture, strategic thought process for things is definitely something that I find is what I learned mostly by going back and getting my MBA.
Okay, great. I have one more question that it's again more of a general question that I'm going to have each of you think about and address. So Mindy asks, women in the workforce continue to face challenges, salary and promotion, work-life balance, et cetera. What have been challenges as women that you have faced, and what advice do you have for other women trying to move their careers forward?
Such a great question.
Where do you begin? No.
Yeah. I think I can start. I think the biggest, some of the biggest challenges are around the mindset regarding women's kind of roles in the workforce, right? And so we know that is different from what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even a year ago. And so definitely seeing that, in a different light is one of the challenges. Also, just continuing to have the support of other women, not saying it is not there, the support of other women, the support of others in the workforce to understand the talent that women bring into organizations. We all know, we've seen the statistics that say when women are in leadership roles, organizations grow their revenues even more than if a male counterpart were in some leadership roles. And so being able to ensure that others are supportive of the career growth that you may have in your career track and everything that you want to move forward is another, I would say, opportunity more so than it is a challenge. And so seeking out those who can support you and be your advocates for you to progress in your career. So I'll leave it there, and I'll let the ladies add anything else.
I can build from there. One thing I totally agree with, just finding mentors, advocates, and sponsors, as well as just peers, and MBA experiences are really powerful in that way. So I have a group of women that I became very close with during business school. I think we were about 33% women, which was pretty high, but even in business school, there are just fewer women, and so building a strong network who continue to be the people that I text or talk with about our careers and our progression and grappling with the challenges we're facing has been really powerful. A second one I've been reflecting on a lot recently as I take on a new role is confidence and building credibility. I think as a woman, I'm fairly petite. I am on the younger side in my sector, in my industry, and so building credibility with clients and trying to play an advisory role, I think I just have this nagging question of confidence in the back of my mind always, and so an MBA actually was really powerful in building that, just taking that on and feeling confident in my abilities, also finding peers, and then a culture that will support women in leadership. I partially joined Bridgespan in this office because there are so many female partners at the firm level, which is really unusual in consulting. And I think another challenge I'm facing is thinking about when to become a parent and how to navigate a really high-intensity job, and knowing that it's hard for anyone becoming a parent, but literally just becoming pregnant will change the amount of work I'm able to do in different ways. And so finding a place that has good supportive policies, good leave, ways to have flexible work environments, we can actually work part-time and still be on track to be promoted. It just takes longer. We're all actually really important factors for me in deciding to join a firm like this. So I'm just thinking about that proactively, if those are some of the decisions that you think you'll be facing, and how to be really active in managing your career in a way that will give you the balance that you want.
Okay. I would just say to know yourself and to stand up for yourself. If you're ever in a position, and this can be really hard to do, but prepare now. Make sure you have that bank account, that savings account now. That if you're ever in a position where you feel compromised, where you feel like you're not being valued because you're a woman, then go. Then go. You will find something new, and you will find something better, and you will find people who will value you and treat you appropriately. It's scary and it's hard to do, but I think that everyone, not just women, but everyone should have that safety net account, so that if they ever feel compromised, they are fully confident in taking care of themselves first. And then I would just say to set boundaries, right? So if you go into a situation and you're asked to take the notes because, wow, you just have the best handwriting on the team. Sure, I'll do that today. Who's going to do it next time? We need to rotate. Right? Setting those boundaries for yourself, as particularly as a woman in whatever job and whatever industry you end up in, to be seen as an equal.
Well, great advice from all three of you for your final words for today, and that's all the time we do have. The three of you did really a great job of explaining the ins and outs of careers in nonprofit, and thank you so much for answering the many questions we had from our listeners today, and thanks for sharing your time and your expertise. Whether you're thinking about getting an MBA or you're a current MBA student, visit Forte at fortefoundation.org for a wealth of resources to help you plan the next steps in your career, and make sure to follow us on your social media platforms as well. Finally, a recording of this webinar and our other Conquer Your Career webinars are available on demand on the Forte website. But thank you for joining us at our webinar today. Have a great afternoon.